pamoja na tukue pamoja kuimarisha Kenya ni jukumu la Kenya.
Well, good afternoon and welcome to this wonderful show today. And we're glad because we're about to have a very powerful conversation. My name is Nokip Kimboy, and right now I'm classified under youth because I'm not yet 35, over 35. When you look at statistics in this country and the continent of Africa, we are very young. The average age of, or the median age of Africa is close to 19. So does Kenya lie therein? So we are a youthful country. But with this bulging youth population, there is a level of disenfranchisement of sorts where there are no jobs, less opportunities for the youth. Though there is hope at the end of the tunnel. What am I talking about? The agricultural sector and the value chain offers so much opportunity. Already the biggest employer in this country still can accommodate more young people. And we are about to have a discussion about the involvement of the youth in the agricultural value chain. And I'm honored to have Dr. Jeremiah Rogito, food specialist, actually specialist in food systems and climate at Agra. Thank you very much, Dr. for making time.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here.
All right. So, you know, there's a popular saying in the Kenyan agricultural talks. People always point this age thing out. You know, the average age of a farmer is 60, and it makes farming look so old, you know, at least at the production level. Just starting from where you are, because you work at Agra, you guys are making many interventions in the agricultural and food systems in different spaces, because Agra is big. How is the youth representation within the organization, just from where you sit?
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. And it's interesting, actually. I think it's early this year, I put in a LinkedIn post that tried to demystify this figure of 60, saying that the average age of a farmer is 60. Mm. And you'll notice perhaps most of the people who cite that particular figure actually cite my own works. Because when I did my master's a couple of years back, one of the figures and statistics, because my master's at that time was looking at young people and how they access resources in agriculture and the influence and how they engage along the value chain. And I remember at that time, one of the statistics that I actually captured there, if you have a chance to look at my master's paper, was that the average age of a farmer is 60. And for my PhD also, I studied issues around youth and agriculture. Is one of the statistics I also used. I've published in a number of papers, articles, and used the same figure. But I think increasingly, and in this particular post, I actually mentioned and said I have been to 42 of the 47 counties in Kenya. And when you see the landscape as you go visiting different farmers, I actually put up three basic arguments, which I argue that 60 is an overstatement. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I base this on three key things. The official statistics for government here in terms of knowing statistics on agriculture is Kiamis. Mm-hmm. And we look at the figures in Kiamis in terms of the distribution, in terms of the aggregation, it actually points to a lower population in terms of averages, in terms of the engagement in agriculture. When you even travel and visit farmers, of course, they are older farmers, you'll see them as you travel along, but most of them are not to that extent of 60. Mm-hmm. And my last argument in that post I said is that there's one demographic argument that seals it. Because when you look at the population census that Kenya last took, the number of people that are above the age of 60 are very few. Mm-hmm. So few. Okay, they are significant. They are in their millions. I think 2 million, thereabout. But they are so few to actually tilt the demographic towards the age of 60. I don't know the exact age, but the point is made that while it's true that the average age is quite significantly high. It could be 50, 55, 40. I don't know the exact figure, but my argument is definitely not 60 per se.
Definitely, yeah. Makes sense. But within Agra, we are seeing a lot of young people involved in the interventions that you guys are making?
Absolutely. One of the biggest initiatives that Agra is running now in partnership with the MasterCard Foundation, we're calling it the Youth Entrepreneurship for the Future of Food and Agriculture, abbreviated as YEFA. And in this particular program, we have an ambitious initiative to, over the next 5 years, to ensure that we're able to reach 10 million young people across the African continent. And it's because of the realization that agriculture has the biggest potential to create job opportunities, because you are grappling with many things across the African continent. One of the challenges we're grappling with is issues around climate change. But also across the African continent, including Kenya, there's a huge population of young people. Actually, it's said that a third of the African young people are unemployed. Another third are vulnerably employed. Yes, you're employed, but even the kind of opportunity you have is not stable. Anything can happen at any particular time. And therefore, really something serious, something urgent needs to be done to be able to address this situation. And I think that's one of the things that Agra as an institution has taken a step forward. Actually, I keep saying that more than 60% of Agra's resources for this strategic period, 5 years, is invested to the youth entrepreneurship of the future of food and agriculture to really ensure that you're able to create opportunities for young people. The vision and ambition is big to be able to have work opportunities for young people up to 3 million. And I think for us to be able to get to that particular level, the interventions we are running, and I think there is much more that we can continue to do to be able to get to those figures.
Definitely. That's quite an ambitious target, 10 million. But of course, when you look at the future and the projections, even the world is looking at Africa. We are projected by 2050, I think 2 out of 5. Young person who's at employable age will be coming from Africa. So the future of work is focusing on this particular continent. But let's start home, because when we discuss matters to do with food and agriculture, to be specific, a lot of people, when we talk about youth, people start thinking about owning land and, running your tractors, basically, essentially at the primary production level. But agriculture is a whole value chain. Let's start at the primary production level, be as it may. Land is a huge factor to it, and resources, capital, to be able, because it's quite intense to be able to do agriculture. How are the youth fitting into this space? Is it generational from observation, where my father was a farmer? After, it's like, Noah, come, do farming in this space and maybe improve, build on it? Or is it the Narok situation where I'm saying, well, I take my cabs, you're taking a cab, somebody is driving a cab, but he's leased land, he's doing some onions down in Kajiado. What is the youth engagement at the production level?
Yeah, that's an important question, and I always have a different view from others as well on this particular aspect. There are those who argue that we focus so much in ensuring that young people are involved in primary production, yet there are many other opportunities, which is good and very important to look at all those opportunities across the value chain. I think, as already hinted, when I examined my master's paper, I looked at the whole value chain from production all the way to consumption. And interestingly, when you think about consumption, 100% they were involved in consumption, because whether you eat to live or live to eat, eating is a must. So 100% is there in consumption, but when you come down now across the value chain, the level of engagement is quite varies. But you mentioned very important points. For that paper, I was actually looking at 3 key resources, and I went further to publish articles on those key resources. One is the issue talked about land. I studied in Kitale. Kitale is known to be that's where I was born, actually, and that's where I spent the first 10 years of my life. Actually, more than 10 years, because I studied high school in Kitale as well. So I think up to last year, I used to say that I've spent more than half of my lifetime in Kitale. And I remember then, as a young farmers organizing secretary, approaching the school principal to request him to give us land as young farmers to be engaged in agriculture within the school context. And he was very gracious. He gave us some piece of land, gave us a fish pond to practice farming. And he was also very gracious to accept to purchase produce from what we had grown as students then. I remember that time being suppliers, as students being suppliers to the school of vegetables. I don't know what happened to the payment. Some people still believe that myself and the chairman were involved. But I think some of the resources were used to assist some needy students at that time. But one thing that happened after we left school, because students then, as high school students, were able to observe the opportunities that come when you're heavily engaged in the farm. So I remember many of them going back home and speaking to their parents, requesting to have access to land for them to be meaningfully engaged in farming, but also to be able to create opportunities and get some income. And I remember many of them calling me and telling me that when they engaged their parents for them to access land, it was almost impossible, because in most societies, land can only be passed over to the next generation at death or something like that. So for some parents, it looked like their children are wishing them a death wish by requesting for them to utilize land. Okay. And because I think some of those parents are looking at it from the part of land ownership, and I think what is most critical is issues around land access, and I think we'll have some time to look at some of the models that I've seen to be very, very amazing in terms of ensuring that young people have access to land. Mm-hmm. But I think, as you rightly mentioned, and I believe that production is an important component, because I often say that unless we get to a place where we are producing food in laboratories, or we genetically modify Noah, so that you don't need to, after this interview, have to eat ugali or something, all that you need to do is take a capsule and you're okay for the rest of the week, then there has to be someone working on farm for that part production to take place. Mm-hmm. So until you get to a place, maybe whether we are producing food in laboratories or man has been modified to take less food, yes, there needs to be people actively involved in the farm, and I think young people should be majority of those people who are actually involved in the production level.
Definitely. It's very important, but those barriers of entry still stand strong right now. Even when you look holistically, agricultural land has been shrinking by the day. And if you inherit some agricultural land, if you're in some prime county like Kiambu, if you're being told, hey, we can put flats here, we give you some 120 million somewhere, you're thinking, if I continue with this agriculture thing, how will I make money of that? So there's so many factors at play. But let's talk about those barriers to entry. It's not only cost for an average Kenyan youth. What is hindering young people from going into food production at the primary level?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the things you already highlighted, one of them is access to land. Mm-hmm. And even looking at my own example, I remember when I started off my very first venture, I started off actually with a few trees, and then went on to do it in a quarter an acre, half an acre, attempted at one point to do at 50 acres, which didn't do extremely well. That's a diplomatic way of choosing my words here. Uh-huh. Yeah, and then went back to 10 acres and kept on increasing to where I am today. But as you rightly mentioned, the issue of land is a critical factor. Mm-hmm. And I think there are successful models on how young people can access land across the African continent, some of the models that we've been able to support to establish so that young people can be engaged in agriculture. But one other very critical thing is issues around financing. I remember when I was doing this study, I realized they are actually correlated, because for you to get money, you need to have collateral. And amongst the easiest form of collateral is either a title deed or any other asset that you own. But most of the cases, we always tilt back to a title deed, which also is in relation to land. And so you find that all these things are almost quite related. But I think the other very critical element, and one of the things I actually examined at that time, was information, because you don't know where to start. I mean, we have 1,000 when you think about, because I remember my high school teacher for agriculture taught me that agriculture is the art and science of crop and livestock production. So when you think about crops themselves, there is a wide range of crops that you can practice. Even within crops itself, there is floriculture, there is horticulture, there is agroforestry. I mean, there are so many things. So you first get confused on where should I start. When you come to livestock also, there's a wide range of livestock, whether it's poultry or animal or cows or whatever. I mean, there are quite a wide range of it. So I think these three key elements for me stand out. One is issues around how they access land if you intently want to be engaged in primary production. Mm-hmm. Issues around financing, because first you are considered high risk. Mm-hmm. I remember even one time then, and I was actually employed at that time, walked into, and this time I was doing my farming venture, must have been in the 2-acre piece of land that time. And I remember that I was growing passion fruit at that time, and I needed to put wire because they need to be trellised as they get up. And that's when you now get to have your harvest and sell it, whether locally or export it for you to get your resources. And I remember I tried almost all sources of finance that I thought was possible. Mm-hmm. Actually, the only person that finally came to help me was a family member, because I tried walking into banks, some of these popular mentioned areas where you can get financing. It was quite a challenge. Yeah. So for me, the top 3 barriers would be land, finance, and information to really guide you where should I start and what should I do.
Definitely. Earlier on, you had mentioned that there are models when it comes to breaking down the barrier of land access. Because a lot of people think about either leasing, going the leasing way, which has been popular, especially around Narok County. If you're able to do wheat, I've seen a lot of people do wheat down there, but people are doing tomatoes, people are doing onions, people are doing watermelon. Actually, a lot of this in Kajiado County. And, looking at the starting capital, if you're able to gather 60, 70K there, you're able at least to kickstart something, risky as it may. Talk to me about those models when it comes to bring down the barriers to accessing land for the Kenyan youth.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's assume that you've chosen the path that you want to engage across the value chain is primary production. Land is obviously a critical factor. But even within that context, what do you want to be involved in? Does it require a wide space of land? Because if you are considering mushroom, then that needs quite a small piece of land. But if you are considering wheat, maize, or some of these value chains, then therefore you need expansive pieces of land. So one of the areas that we've supported, this is in Tanzania actually, through the Building Better Tomorrow BBT program. It's a big program, flagship program, supported by many partners. And this program identifies large tracts of land, so government land, and ensures that the infrastructure that is required, whether it's water, whether it's the housing or anything that is required for you to successfully be involved in agriculture, is placed in that particular area. Actually, it's one of the suggestions that I actually given in my thesis when I examined issues of land, that we can identify. And there are many areas where land, as you rightly mentioned earlier, in Kenya, it's a different story because agricultural land is shrinking by the day. The productive land, that's where people are settling. That's where other opportunities for you to access money comes. And I always hold the view that if you are involved in a business that doesn't give you the best returns, leave it. Yeah, but of course people must eat. So you must also think about the other advantages of agriculture in that line. But I think models like, for instance, the Building Better Tomorrow BPT program, if governments can be able to adopt this, and in Kenya, in the context of Kenya, for instance, where agriculture is devolved, if county governments can be able to adopt this, ensuring that where there exists large tracts of land, and enable the infrastructure there so that young people can come and do whatever crops they want to be engaged there. And I think the program that, for example, you have in Tanzania, they have supported across, not just in terms of them accessing land, but also having the infrastructure, but also towards the tail end when the produce is ready to support them in issues around marketing. Yeah, so I think that is one of some of innovative models that can be applied to ensure that young people can easily access land for utilization and profitability.
Okay. I like that. It's giving SEZ, a special economic zone. But for land access, we've made sure that there is proper water supply. We can even do other infrastructure that when you harvest, you have a cooling system, all that, just to enable, make it very easy, subsidize. And that's quite interesting. I know even amongst the youth, this issue of even another challenge under that is women in farming, because traditionally there have been, especially land ownership, which has been a huge barrier. I think some of these interventions will sort of have this trickle effect, transforming agriculture, even bringing gender parity within agriculture.
Absolutely, it becomes very important. I actually failed to mention that. You are first disadvantaged by you being a young person. Even you look at the status of the climate report that was released recently, it said that young people are the most vulnerable to climate change. But also in the engagement in terms of agriculture and even access to land, what we are discussing at the moment, you are first disadvantaged by being a young person. But it's even worse if you are a lady. And even you look at it even in biblical times, it was a challenge at that time also. You look, for those who read the Bible, you perhaps have seen the story of Ruth. Ruth was not just a young person, but also she was a lady. So even in terms of the best that she could do was gleaning. Where I come from in Kitale, we call it Mrokoto. After people have harvested their maize, we leave for any other person to come and perform gleaning in the farm. So as you rightly mentioned, you're first disadvantaged by being a young person, but even more if you're a woman. And so I think models like this, where we're able to break down and bring down the barriers, can be able to ensure that young women as well are involved in agriculture.
Definitely. Yeah. And on the issue of access to finance, and I'm glad you've healed from that trauma, or working into financial institutions, and they're like, no, 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 thank you. Oh, don't call us, we'll call you. That model. Yeah, but I've seen, because banks and financial institutions are in the business of making money. And that risk assessment, they're within their right to be able to do so. And as a young person, no collateral, definitely I'm riskier. I've seen organizations and sort of people entering into partnerships to see that funding is sort of targeted for the youth. Some of these programs, from your observation, do you think they're having the intended impact of young people accessing finance, especially in agricultural finance?
Yeah, absolutely. And good thing you mentioned it's some of them, and of course the others have challenges that needs to be tightened as you move along the way. I think the most critical thing is about access for you to have the financing, but also for you to actually utilize it. Because sometimes what happens is that there are competing interests and needs for the financing that you get at that time. So I think a number of innovative models have come into play. Some of them are those that ensure that we don't give you actual cash, so that we do, for instance, input financing. So for instance, if you are a farmer and you needed to plow and you don't have cash to plow, you are enabled to access maybe a tractor or something that will help you to plow. If you are involved in planting forestry or things like that, access to seedlings and mainly input financing for you to be able to venture. Of course, that brings down the risk because of competing needs of cash, then you will have to utilize the cash for the intended purpose.
Yes.
But I think sometimes one of the challenges with input financing is the timing of that particular financing and the timing of that particular intervention. And I'll give you an example. This must have been 5 years ago. I'd been involved, I was still doing passion fruit, moved now from 2 acres and moved to 10 acres. And one of my challenges at that time was also accessing the wire for trellising. And I think I remember I'd been chasing this input financing for quite some time. And I kept on going over and over again, filling forms after the other. And I think by the time finally my crops, and because I'm hoping that is going to come, I'm not looking at other opportunities and other avenues to be able to solve this particular challenge, and trying to get the financing I'm chasing now is for other issues, because I know for sure I'm going to get an input finance to help me to put the trellis. But I remember one particular day walking to the farm, and all my passion fruits are lying down on the ground. And when they lie down, they are now facing other challenges. The issues of diseases come into play.
Yes.
Yeah, pests also come into play because they are just lying down on the floor. And I needed to make an immediate action at that time. So I remember being very disappointed that morning and trying to chase all manner of financing I could get to buy the wire. And I remember I left that time. That farm was in Eldoret. I left and went to town and purchased the wire from a hardware. By the time the wire is actually now coming for me to utilize in the farm, it's too late. And because now I can't change, because now I have different needs from what I had at that time, because I've already solved the need that I was chasing at that time. So I think also as we think about this access, it's important also in the context of agriculture to look at the timing on when we access it. It's also a very critical element.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Wow. Dr. Jeremiah Rogito is somebody who does not just speak about farming. He's done it, and he's giving practical examples. We want to take a short break from this discussion on matters youth in agriculture, and we'll return with more. Keep it KTN, keep it Farm Kenya. Welcome back to the Farm Kenya show. We are discussing matters to do with the youth in agriculture, and today I have Dr. Jeremiah Rogito, a specialist in food systems and climate at Agra, and also he happens to be very young, so it qualifies him to talk about youth in agriculture from a very personal point of view. You're not only young, you've done agriculture, agribusiness, and you've experienced these barriers and challenges. And before we took a break, you talked about timing, which is very important. But I don't know how that can be worked out, because again, access to some of these opportunities, financing opportunities. It seems to be a process. So you tend to follow, as people call it, mtaratara flani, a certain process before you are able to access. So is there a remodeling so that the timing element can be factored into, so that our target is not a miss at the end of the day?
Yeah, absolutely. Because even when you think about, and for things, for instance, crop production, livestock, there's a way you can play around it. But for things like crop production, it's season sensitive. I mean, if you miss that particular season, you have to wait for the next season. And I think I remember one particular example when I was doing potatoes in a 30-acre piece of land. And up to almost the time before the rain begins, before the onset of rains, I have prepared the land, but haven't gotten the seed. And I remember making a very wrong decision, a very rash decision at that time, to go and just buy any sort of potato and plant it there. And see, this was 30 acres. For 30 acres, you don't want to make such a mistake. I don't know why I made that mistake, having studied agriculture myself. But anyway, we learn every day. Yeah. So I think us who are there in the agronomic sense and us in the development space should be able to ensure that we're able to work and address these challenges over time. And I think some things have been able to be done in some cases, but I think on issues of financing, there's still much more that needs to be done to ensure that we're able to tighten the issues around access to financing, that it aligns very well with the onset of the season. Yeah.
That's very, very important. Convincing the financial sector on land, because ideally we can have development partners, and it's a good thing. But that's not the strategy long term. The strategy should be at least the financial systems to develop confidence in the agricultural sector, and to be able to pump money there because they see value and they're able to get their money back in profit. I don't know, how do we achieve that? How do we sort of make it de-risk the primary and the whole value chain at large? How do we de-risk agriculture?
Yeah, I think something is considered a risk because you're not able to predict what's going to happen. And it makes sense from the reading of it, because you'll see that most of the financial institutions, even if they're financing, they'll tend to finance issues around infrastructure, because that's what you can. It's almost predictable. You have almost some sense of trust in what you're doing. For instance, if you are investing someone getting a tractor, or investing someone getting irrigation infrastructure, it's something that you can actually make some estimated guess on what's going to happen. Because and even if it's, for instance, if it's a tank, so you'll see a lot of these investments going into infrastructure for financial institutions. But when it comes to things, for instance, whether it's cows or chicken, you don't know, any slight deviation can really destroy all of them, whether it's crop or even flowers, one particular disease, and wipes up the entire crop. Yeah, so I think from where I sit, one of the things that we've actually been doing, and for the last 2 years, with the support of the Gates Foundation, in 5 countries, that is Kenya, Ghana, Tanzania, Zambia. Did I mention Uganda? 5 countries. We've been supporting to develop something we call ClimateVAT, the Climate Vulnerability and Risk Assessment Tool. And this tool enables you to be able to project and even predict and have early warning system to know what's going to happen. And I think I remember I was in Uganda during the validation of this tool in the case of Uganda at that time. And one person from the insurance said that this tool is a very important tool for us, even insurance, to be able to predict, analyze, and see the climate in this particular region of Uganda is going to look in this particular manner. So even in terms of when you model it, in terms of how we're able to calculate our premiums, you can be able to make such kind of decisions. So I think if financial institutions are able to step out also from their comfort zone and also take good use of tools like these ones, for instance, ClimateVAT, to be able to make assessment of, and ClimateVAT, not VAT, it's not tax. It's VAT because of vulnerability assessment tool. That's why we call it ClimateVAT, is to enable people to be able to understand, predict, have an almost accurate prediction of how the climate is going to be, and also make projections in terms of what's going to be the output, and therefore make informed decisions when lending. Because we don't want also financial institutions to make losses because of advancing financing to ventures that perhaps may sometimes make losses.
Definitely. And it's quite, we could call it, it's quite ironic that, our economy for the longest time, is agri-based and agri-backed. Whereas when it comes to the channeling of resources, it's not as attractive, that agricultural sector. So it's giving, it's almost a two-faced or a two-headed animal, which has on one end the biggest potential, because agriculture is the biggest actually employer when you look at it from primary and also the extended value chain at large. So it's quite interesting to see that the financial systems are a little bit very careful when it comes to on lending, but utilization of such tools, as you say, brings in predictability and sort of calms down our finance brothers, which is very, very important. The other thing you had mentioned is the gap in information. And you said, I believe information is power. Mm-hmm. For the Kenyan youth, what is that gap, that information gap, that is also presenting itself as a barrier of entry when it comes to young people coming into agriculture?
Yeah, I think it's mainly to think of where should I start? Because we keep saying that there are many opportunities across the agriculture value chain. And I think it's my former FAO country rep for Kenya here, now works for the Africa, should be the Africa rep for World Vegetable Center, Gabriel Galema, who says we need to eat, what we need to eat is food, we don't eat opportunities. So, but when you think about the many opportunities that we keep talking about, where are they, where do I start, what should I do, and what is the step-to-step process? And I think I'm happy with what some institutions have been doing at this particular moment. I know, for instance, Brighter Monday now, in support of MasterCard Foundation, is developing playbooks of different sectors, and starting, of course, with the agriculture sector to look at, for instance, if I want to venture into agriculture, where should I start? Should it be crop? Should it be livestock? But also looking at the environment and the ecosystem where you come from. But I think also wanted to make a comment on something that you mentioned earlier. I was trying to make sure that I don't be political. But it's an important concept to think about if you are to be truthful about issues of agriculture. And it's a discussion I had just last Friday with one of our partners. And a partner had gone to visit another area, and they were told that in this particular field of land, we used to have crops. And it's easy to say that because if, for instance, you have potatoes or onions that you had planted, maybe after 3 or 4 months, they are out of the field. And that's why you'll see most people trying to make sure that even if they do the investments or even trying to, whether on land or do anything, they'll want to prefer to, on issues that are infrastructure, things that you can see. Because if it's a water tank, you are sure that the water tank, unless it bursts, you are sure that the water tank is going to be there 3 years, 4 years, most likely. If it's drip irrigation, you are going to see the drip there, physically going to see it. If you sunk a borehole, you'll see the borehole. Yeah, but if it's an onion crop, 3 or 4 months later, it won't be there. And that's why you'll see also that even sometimes one of the challenges we have is that the government, which is the biggest spender in most economies, tries to also limit in terms of its investment to agriculture, because what the Kenyan voter wants to see are physical things, either actual cash or physical things. So they want to see roads. And therefore, from a policy maker perspective, you're also conflicted now. Should I continue to pump money into something that will disappear after some time? People eat it and it's done, or should I invest more on roads and things like that? Yeah, I just wanted to make that comment.
Definitely. Very, very important. And it's a valid comment because, as we say, political goodwill is very critical. And it is our politicians that also are making and influencing policy heavily. And it's very, very important. Going back to the information gap element, of course, partnerships going in to educate farmers. Because we are in a country, we always discuss youth unemployment every day. And young people are looking for opportunities. And it almost seems like a low-lying fruit to tap into this hunger of, I'm trying to find something to engage in. I went to college, I haven't gotten a job in this line. So the big question is, how do we bring it closer? That is one, to the Kenyan youth, and also make it palatable. Because sometimes we run programs, we call them information programs. Then after we do an after assessment, how many people are influenced by this information to be able to act on it? And you find there is very little. So how do you make it effective to bridge this information gap?
Yeah. When I think personally in terms of how I make decisions, even in terms of the things that I want to purchase or even things that I want to invest in, it has to be something that I either know and have prior knowledge about it, or something that I get to see over time. And that's why I see the adverts that run on my phone, sometimes even on WhatsApp status, you see someone has posted a cloth or a shoes, and then you immediately make a decision that I want to purchase this. And so one of the areas that as institutions, for instance, Agra has heavily invested, because with the recognition that in many countries, extension systems have changed over time. For a long time, we used to train extension officers who will walk into the farmer fields and give them advice in terms of what needs to be done. In most countries, there's a shift now to demand-driven, where the actual farmer has to walk into the extension officer to request for this particular service. So one of the models that we've very been passionate about over the last 3 years particularly is something we call pluralistic extension models. This is looking at all forms of models to ensure that your target person has access to the information that you want them to have, and they have it at the right time. But also tying this also with the issues around early warning system, that even as you provide this particular information, the farmer also has a knowledge in terms of what to anticipate in terms of the changes in climate, changes in terms of weather, what to anticipate, and when to make this particular decision. And I remember it's my boss who was giving an example of how he went to visit, I will not mention the country, we went to visit the fields and realized that you look at the field, it was actually a maize crop. It was really flourishing, but they cannot harvest because at that time it's also raining, but it's ripe for the time of harvest. But because interrogating it further, he realized that the only challenge that happened is that there was a delay in terms of planting. So by the time they get to the harvest, it coincides with the next rain season. So having this particular information and making sure that you're able to really plant on time and also harvest on time, because what will happen in such a case is that it will continue raining, and that particular maize, most of it is going to be lost on the farm. And even if they try to recoup some of it is not going to be healthy because of issues around aflatoxin in terms of how they're going to store it after that particular harvest. So from where we sit in terms of access to information, as I already mentioned, we've been able to pilot pluralistic extension models, taking advantage of government extension systems that exist, but also taking advantage of, in community levels, we piloted models. For instance, we call it the village-based advisor model, where you have a lead farmer within the community who is trained, capacity built, has this knowledge, and works with the farmers within his surrounding to ensure that they also get to that particular level that he is. Other countries have adopted other names, but in the context of Kenya, there are different names also that have been adopted by different stakeholders, but really having someone central who's already practiced, tried it, and ensuring also the community learns from him.
Okay. Quickly, let us run either up or down the value chain, whichever way you see it. But now, from production, we are heading downstream. There's so many other opportunities that young people can tap into and be part of the value chain other than production. Talk to me about some of the emerging or some of the areas within the agricultural value chain, all the way to consumption, before this food actually reaches to, because even consumption has its own, opportunities there, yeah? But in the age of AI, technology, and, people being so informed, what are some of these low-lying opportunities that we can tap in as government, as organizations, to make sure that youth are able to also fit downstream when it comes to agricultural value chain?
Absolutely. We've actually been able to compute and look at the entire value chain. And I think, as I already mentioned earlier, in consumption, everybody's there. Everyone must eat for either for their survival or for any particular reason. But as you move from production, the opportunities that exist, for instance, in input supply. And there are various forms of input supply. So it could be fertilizer, whether organic or inorganic fertilizer, and ensuring that farmers are able to access it. In some cases, you can actually also make that particular fertilizer if you are thinking about organic fertilizer, because one of the challenges that you have is in terms of its packagings, and therefore in terms of even access, because some of these organic fertilizers are very bulky. So it really must be packaged well and easily condensed for it to be utilized within that particular region. So when you think about inputs, so particularly I talked about fertilizers, but also inputs, for instance, seed inputs like chemicals also. And in some cases also you can be able to produce bio-inputs that can be utilized within that particular region, within your farm, also within that particular surrounding, and in some cases even be able to upscale and sell to even other larger regions. So moving away from production, there exists many opportunities, and I've seen this in my previous working assignments, and even today, working and seeing young farmers and even older farmers alike engaged in these models of ensuring they're able to produce organic fertilizers and able to sell it, being able to produce bio-inputs, biochemicals, and actually be able to sell it. But even as you move further, and I think one of the areas that I've seen many young people engaged in is in issues around transport related to agriculture produce, whether it's transporting the seeds so that someone can be able to access the seed at the right time to plant, to be able to transport the chemicals, the fertilizers, or able transporting the final produce after you've been able to harvest and offsetting it to the market. So as you move across the value chain, also there exists opportunity around transportation.
Okay.
But even as you move further, there are opportunities around the processing area, whether it's using of small-scale machineries to be able to produce, whether it's, in some cases, I used to see that in Western Kenya, in areas like Viga and Kakamega, using simple elements for solar drying for vegetables, because one of the challenges we have is post-harvest losses in agriculture. It's said actually a third of the food that is produced globally is either lost or wasted. Therefore, so ensuring that we're able to pilot some of these models and young people being engaged in ensuring that they're able to be involved in processing in a small way, in a large way, there exists opportunities there, and I can go on and on beyond all the way up to the level of consumption.
Wow. Wow, so much opportunity right there. So movement, very, very important. Value addition has always been that discussion that we've had, even as a country, not only in agriculture, but many sectors, manufacturing at large. But agriculture is one of those that for the longest time, Africa and Kenya has exported raw products. And the argument has always been, why don't you value add this thing internally, then sell it better? Of course, we can go back in time and argue about the systems that were laid even during the colonial era to make sure that this is accustomed to it. Just recently, I saw in Ghana, they're now pushing to have their cacao, value added within the country. It will create more value. I don't know whether it will go through because, again, it's a whole political process and also the global forces at play. But locally in Kenya, value addition in the agricultural value chain, what is the potential of that? What will that do if at all it's taken seriously?
Yeah, we see it taking place in some areas, in some value chains. You think about, for instance, most of the juices that we consume, that is value added and produced here locally in Kenya and sold here in Kenya. But in some value chains, I think there exist some other technicalities, but I think there is much more that you can be able to do as a country to ensure that you're able to value add it. Yeah, when you think about crops, for instance, coffee, tea, most of this being exported as it is and exporting our best grade for it to come back again to some places being sold to us. So I think there's much more that can be done, but I think borrowing also and learning lessons from some other very successful cases in the cases of juices, whether you see pineapple juices, a lot of it around that has been value added here in Kenya and packaged nicely for it to be sold back in Kenya.
Yes.
Juices like oranges and many other juices, including passion fruit, one of my favorite fruits. Yeah, so I think we can be able to learn successful models from what has been done in value chains like those ones and be able to apply it in other value chains across the agriculture sector.
Definitely.
Yeah.
If speaking of juices, it's reminded me of my local plug was sugarcane juice, and he takes sugarcane juice, mixes it with some passion, some beetroot here, and you can see that there is an element of adding value. I got fruits, and now I've made you, juice. Yes. Right now we have an excess of mangoes. Everyone is selling mangoes. Yeah, you go everywhere. There is a car. Mangoes are there. And I think Professor Kibwana down in Pakweni,
Yep.
they had done a huge plant. I hope it's still doing it, but it is about value adding, and I see there's so much potential right there. Our time is running out, Dr. In closing, I know there are programs that you guys are doing. The target is almost 10 million Kenyan youth. For this year, and specifically Kenya, involving youth in agriculture, what is the goal? What can we hold at least Agra or you in person accountable to by the end of this year, or maybe a particular time frame? What are we looking at?
I think our goal really is to work at the system level to ensure that young people have the necessary infrastructure, the tools and the playbook for them to be able to meaningfully engage in agriculture.
Okay.
But I also sit and hold the view that also there is a role that there is how much you can be able to go, but also there is how much that as a person you can be able to go. For someone who is drowning, in as much as you want to save them from drowning, he or she who is drowning also needs to play a part in ensuring that they are also saving themselves from the aspect of drowning. The 10 million reach target is for the African continent, and the 3 million work opportunities is also an African target. For Kenya is even much lower. Yeah, so I think from where I sit, really, the role of young people, the part that they need to play, they need to be able to take it up. I think it's one former American president who used to say that if you don't do it now, when do you want to do it? If you don't do it here, when do you want to do it? Where do you want to do it? And if it's not you who is doing it, then who is going to do it? And I think it's the same person who kept on saying that ask not what the government will do for me, ask not what Kenya will do for me. Kenya has done its best to ensure that you have access to this information, but ask also what you yourself are going to do. And my parting shot has always been that for whatever cost and for whatever reason, start. Even if it's starting small, make sure that you start. It cannot sit as an idea in your head, in your mind forever. Make sure you're able to make a progress and start from somewhere.
Definitely. There's no better way to finish it up than to call people to action. Start. And the good book says, the Lord rejoices to see the work begin. Never despise small beginnings, Okay. Some of us are like, I only have 10K. No. Start with that and build on it. And that's been an amazing conversation. Dr. Jeremiah Rugito, specialist, food systems and climate at Agra, and also somebody who's done farming, his lived experience. He's a youth, very young, and he has lived being a youth in the Kenyan agricultural system. And he says that there's plenty to be done. But at the end of the day, for you as a young person, you have a responsibility on yourself to leave that idea out. And you're challenged to start, even if it means going into those financial institutions and knocking those doors. Do not get tired, but most importantly, begin. That's been our conversation right here at the Farm Kenya Show. My name is Noah Kipkimboy. Enjoy the rest of your viewing. We're out.
Tufanye kazi pamoja na